Good morning. How's it going? I don't really know how to follow that video right now, so I'm going to pretend I didn't see it. I'm Brian Dole. I work for GitHub. I have the greatest job in the world, so I'm here today to talk to you about GitHub and an egalitarian love story. I'm very interested in talking about the things that I think are the essence of GitHub and how that can apply to the open source projects that you're working on, to your own personal work, and to the projects that you're working on. And I think egalitarianism is sort of a good model to talk about those practices. I've been here all week. This has been an awesome trip so far. This is me skateboarding in your best park. If I had video, it would be way better, but it was really good. Marion has been an amazing host this week. We went out to the Ria Monastery. Incredibly beautiful place. So he takes us here, which is really beautiful and amazing. And then Stefan takes us out and gives us this. I don't know who my favorite is yet, but it's probably not Stefan, sorry. Ryan Tomeko, who was, I think, the first engineer hire at GitHub, said this a few years ago, that GitHub isn't a startup, it's a punk band that makes software. And this is actually the tweet that got the idea for me to have this talk, that I think the essence that we see in punk music applies very well to companies. We took, I think it was June this year, a little bit of money, $100 million. And the amazing thing is that doesn't mean that the company's any different. These core values still stay the same. And I love seeing this on Twitter that same day, that we're still an independent punk band, we're just going with a major label distributor. So egalitarianism, how does this apply to what we do? How does it apply to what you do? There are three core principles of egalitarianism. Such a hard word, isn't it? Egalitarianism. Equality for all. So all the themes here are going to center around these core principles. And equality, I think, is a great thing to be striving for. Perhaps just as importantly, we know that rules are usually terrible. And so as few rules as possible is probably the best way to move us forward. Group decision making. This is another big part. I think obviously we see the parallels already between the open source projects that we're working on and these tenets. Decentralized control. Again, not having a strong hierarchy allows you to have input from everyone, and if we're able to sort of work in a decentralized model, I think we can see the benefits. So to tie these two things together, specifically to the tools we're using, Git and GitHub the company, we have Conway's Law. Kyle talks about this a lot. This is a very interesting sort of observation that the communication systems that we use inform the products that we build. And so Git is at the center of GitHub, and if we're using GitHub and then the company that uses GitHub to build GitHub, there's this sort of circle of influence here. So I'd like to suggest that Git itself is egalitarian. All repositories are equal. The repository that I have on my laptop is the same one that's on github.com that runs the application itself. They're all equal. We can see those parallels. Choose your own workflow. We don't prescribe to you how you should work with these tools, but you get to adapt them to the way that you would like to work. And of course, collaboration without coordination. We don't pre-assume that you have to coordinate these changes. You can be offline and in separate parts of the world, and we can still be committing to the same repository. So github.com is also egalitarian. It's influenced by Git itself. How many people here use Git in general? How many of you also use GitHub? Excellent. Good numbers. I like you guys. On github.com, everyone can contribute. You don't have to have commit rights to contribute to a project. You can fork that project, make your contributions, and propose that they should be suggested. That's an extremely egalitarian process. We're suggesting that everybody can fork the projects they want, change them to their own needs, and suggest them back. So this process of pull requests is a very egalitarian process. Anyone can contribute back. This is equality. This is how open source works. GitHub makes it easier to work together than it does alone. If you're off coding by yourself, your ideas are only as great as those that you can come up with on your own. But going back to our egalitarian trends, group decision making, right? Let's work together and get to a better solution. If I were a better designer, you would see a circle up here. But the tools we use influence the people that use them. The people that use them build these great products that are influenced by those tools. They adapt certain values that help them build these products. And there's a certain level of taste in which we apply those rules. Carrying these forward, we look at open source software as a very egalitarian process. Everyone can contribute. We have large groups of people working together to make a better project. Ryan Tomeko gave a talk recently and talked about what he thought were the 4 key constraints for open source projects. And if you think about them, those constraints actually free the fact that we can work together in this way. So if we stick to these 4 constraints, we're empowered to make better software together. And I think this is applicable not only to these projects, but how we work in our companies and our day-to-day lives. So the first is electronic communication. This is extremely important to us. We have about 1/3 of the company is not in the United States. About 1/3 of the company is somewhere in the United States, not near our home base in San Francisco. And we've got folks in the home office. So electronic communication has to be the predominant way of communicating. If we have conversations in person in conference rooms that are boring, great shoes, then people are left out. We want to make sure that those conversations happen in a way that enables everyone to be part of moving the company forward. Everything you work on should be available via URL. This is what's so great about pull requests, right? We don't have to have a conversation or, at worst, a meeting to talk about why I think this improvement should happen. Why, if you queue up 4 videos on MPlayer, perhaps they should be streamed together. Maybe someone will contribute that patch later on today. Asynchronous. This is also obviously very important. We have time zones to deal with, right? I don't even know what day it is at home right now, but I'm pretty sure that no one's awake. So it's really important that these conversations can happen in a way that are asynchronous, that I'm not depending on someone to answer me right away, that we have tools and systems to leave our best thoughts and have someone respond later on. Lock-free. This is absolutely at the core of Git. It helps on GitHub, and I think it's a really important thing to think about at your company. Lock-free means you're not having to coordinate with any central resource. That can be Git. I don't have to coordinate with anyone else. I'm not waiting for a new version number from a subversion server. But it also means that I'm not waiting for a manager to tell me what to do. That I'm not waiting till someone gets in the office to tell them. Lock-free means we're all free and able to work on the work that we think is important and without having a coordinator tell each other what to do. So we're moving up the stack. We've talked about Git, about GitHub.com, and here is GitHub the company and how we work in an egalitarian nature. Influence over hierarchy. This is a very, very important idea, that instead of having a deep hierarchy of who the managers are and they tell the people who are doing what work that they think is important, that you have influence over the work that you do. That we all have equal influence based on our skills, interest, and company focus. So if I'm good at a particular thing, and I'm very interested in projects that relate to that, and it happens to relate to the success of GitHub, that's where my influence lies. It's not because of what my job title is, or where I live, or how long I've been at the company. Those things are completely irrelevant. This is an egalitarian idea that allows everyone to contribute to their best ability and do the best work of their lives. Anyone heard of Hubot? Do you know of Hubot? Is he famous here? Not too many. Hubot is amazing. He's my favorite person, or non-person. Hubot is our chat-based office. He's a chatbot. It's open source. You can check it out on GitHub, hubot.github.com. The most important part is that having a chat-based office, using chat as your central resource for communication, means that it doesn't matter where anybody is, right? I don't know where somebody's logging into chat. We've gone a long way to make sure that we've got great clients so that chat is the first order way of communicating. We've got chat clients on our phones, iPads, on the Mac, Windows, Android. So it's important to us, in addition to the web client, to make sure that we have access to this most important resource. And the fact that our conversations are archived and available all around the world means that this is where we meet. This is our office. The headquarters in San Francisco is a great place to have a party. But this is where work gets done. So earlier, egalitarianism, I was sort of struggling with this because they talk about hating rules, right? We're down on rules. I think rules are typically temporary and restrictive. Values communicate why. Values tell you what's important. So we do have 5 core values at GitHub that I want to share. The first is optimizing for happiness. This is the most important thing to us. Our products are a point in time. It's what we're building today. What's more important to us is that we are optimizing for the happiness of our employees. We're optimizing for you. We're optimizing for our customers. We want to make sure that the work that we do every day is enjoyable. And we think that out of that is going to come a better product and profits. The best argument wins. This is egalitarianism. This says that it doesn't matter who you are in the organization. It doesn't matter where this idea came from. What matters is that it's right. So we don't have a hierarchy of who makes decisions. No one gets to tell someone else what to do. The point is that if the argument is solid, that should be the argument that wins. We want to make decisions from first principles. This means starting from scratch every single time. Instead of thinking about what every other company has done, what every other product has done, when you think you know that there's a best practice, I think it's wise to stop and think about why. Because it's not necessarily worthwhile to follow in the path of what someone else has done right when it's important to your happiness, when it's important to the product. We want to start from first principles and consider, how might we do this with what we know today? If we started from scratch, is this the idea that we would use? Is this the tool we would use? This makes sure that we're always heading in a direction that we feel is right. Create superfans. This is an amazing part of the company culture, and I think that it's a really incredible thing that every company should consider. That you don't just want a good product. You want people to love what you do. You want people to love the projects you're working on, love the people that they're working with. And instead of thinking about support as a chore, you want to take that as an opportunity to connect to people. You want to take that as an opportunity to make super fans out of them, people that would absolutely break down doors to use your product and to talk to you. Be awesome and change the world. At the end of the day, making great products is fun and interesting, but there's got to be some kind of end goal. We've got to have some way of focusing it. But also be open to the various directions that our project roadmap might go. We have big, big dreams, and I think it's important to always keep those in perspective. So I'd like to suggest that you are egalitarian, that your projects are egalitarian, that your companies are egalitarian. The way that you work together can fit this same model. So if we think about how we can apply these, how can you improve the equality in your teams? Are there ways for you to consider changing your communication style, or changing the decision-making process, or changing how you work to open up the possibilities of having a more equal workplace? What rules do you have on a regular basis that are actually necessary? I think it's very, very easy to experience pain in a company and try to solve it with rules. And these rules grow over time in scab, and we become really difficult to improve our products and our company when we have this big background of rules that we have a hard time breaking. How can you make the best decisions? Can you change, again, how you work and how you communicate to make sure that the best decision wins? And how are you going to change the world? So I'd like to take some questions in the last few minutes, but first remind you that we're having a GitHub drink up at Rocket on Sunday, just in case you want to come over for a beer. So I invite you all. Thank you. Who's going to be first? Yay. No, I won't drink Bosa.
Okay, so you say that influence is important. How do you measure influence in your team to see how, I mean, is there a difference between pay for someone who has more influence than others? And how do you measure the influence?
So the influence at GitHub relates very specifically to the work that you do every day and considering what kind of perspective you bring to the table. So for example, we have dozens and dozens of projects going on at GitHub. We have a team that works on GitHub for Mac, GitHub for Windows, we have an Android client, we have mobile clients, we have our enterprise product. So the work that everyone does every day is very much related to the influence that they have. So if you're working on a project, your influence over the direction of that project, you have greater influence over decision making. What's important, though, is that you have to be open, again, to other perspectives. So training is a great example of somebody who, when we do training all over the world, we have contact with customers that have experiences that we don't necessarily know about. And so when someone from training comes back and says, look, this is the experience people are having, you know, we've got a lot to improve here, right? They've got influence because they're bringing with them the perspective of people outside the company. So I think it's something that's difficult to measure, obviously, but what we look at in the context of every decision is making sure that we're having productive conversations and that the end result happens pretty quickly. Instead of creating rules around who is and isn't allowed to have a conversation there. It's more social.
Hi.
Hey.
So GitHub just got $100 million. What's your next step? I mean, I just watched the startup school.
Oh, good.
Talk, yeah. And what's your next step for like owning the world?
So the core idea that we have is that it's easier to work together than alone. And I think that's a really, really valuable and central core idea. So right now, I think we've got a great product that allows a lot of people to work together on software. So I'd like to argue that it's definitely better to work together on GitHub than alone anywhere else. And there's a lot of interesting things happening in the world. There's a lot of things that people are producing and working on. Collaboration right now is pretty terrible in the rest of the ecosystem. Software tools, for us, this is second nature, right? Version control is something that we have used for generations. When we talk to journalists, this completely blows their mind. We gave talks at the Berkeley Journalism School, and we were kind of confused why we were invited. And you realize that people are working together on papers on GitHub, that this is how they're collaborating with their professors or editors. And I think it's a very interesting idea to consider how we can apply these kind of concepts to the bigger world of collaboration. So not a specific answer on purpose.
Okay, so GitHub has been big for a while now, and what is getting bigger is your team. It's getting huge.
Yeah.
How do you manage equality in a big team? I mean, with a lot of people, and how do you manage to get their voice heard? So how do you break the teams up? How do you manage all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something, honestly, that this is something that we work on every day right now. So for the first, 2 years, I think, GitHub was less than 15 people. We didn't have an office for the first year or so. The first commit was made to GitHub on October 17th, 2007. So we're just over 5 years, at least in the repository. We're, I think, 130 people right now. So it's definitely been interesting to see how these practices fit the team as it grows. I think the most amazing thing in the world is that it has. I think we certainly heard that at 10 people, you'll never make it to 25, and you'll never make it to 50. These are great ideas, but they're definitely not going to apply to my company because we're too big, right? Team management for us, again, really centers around the work that you do, and that's a pretty easy way to start breaking things up. People spend time usually in 1 or 2 projects for the most part, and they have their sort of circle of people that work on those same projects. And so immediately you're kind of carving down to a smaller company. What's honestly really, really hard is being distracted by the amazing stuff that everybody's working on. We haven't come up with an answer for that because, again, with a 24-hour schedule, we've got people all over the world. You wake up in the morning, there's always something amazing that happened overnight. That level of distraction we haven't figured a good answer for. There's too much awesome going on. But I think, again, it's just important to keep it loose and try to keep the culture and just kind of look for ways to make it easy. The big thing that we do, specifically that I think helps newer people, your first week at GitHub happens in San Francisco, no matter where you live. So we fly people into San Francisco. You're there with the most number of people that we have in one place. And you have a lot of face time. You have a lot of food with people. And you become born into that culture. And that is really helpful once you go to a remote kind of chat-based office. The other thing that we do is we have 2 summits every year where every person in the company flies together to some place. And we have basically a conference where everyone is presenting ideas and hearing about what's going on. We do mini summits, so a team that works on a particular project might also have kind of a summit experience, but just limited to their team. So those are the things that we're kind of applying to keep that going.
You say that you change the world. Obviously, in your case, this is true. You're changing the software world. But how can one be sure that if he actually changes the world, he changes it for the better?
Excellent question. I think that the 2 things that apply to making the world a better place are equality and transparency. And I think we've obviously succeeded at transparency. The whole fact that we have 2.5 million people working on over 4 million projects, a lot of those are open to the public. Those are open source repositories. That level of transparency and sharing, I think, is obviously something that propels companies forward. It's great to see companies like Square and Twitter, who are born in the age of open source, who obviously leverage a ton of open source to build this company. But then if you look at their pages on GitHub, they're releasing 20 projects, right? They've got all sorts of great things that they're contributing back to the community. The second thing is equality. And for me, what's really, really interesting is to see all the government activity that's happening on GitHub. The White House has open sourced a lot of projects that relate specifically to the White House itself. We're also seeing the US federal government contribute a lot through the various agencies. And we're seeing this throughout the world. And that's something I'm really passionate about, is making sure that we're getting more and more and more of what we see every day in the open source communities built into governments. And that kind of transparency and openness, I think, is going to have to lead to a better world. All right. Oh.
I'm on fire now. So my next question will be, GitHub and Linus Torvalds has this argument about pull requests and how GitHub is changing the underlying the underlying functionality of Git. And what are your thoughts about this? I mean, how GitHub can excel the Git tool without changing it, like for the specific platform, which is GitHub?
Yeah, so there's two interesting things. One is that the most predominant Git core committer works for GitHub. And so we obviously have a great perspective on what the overall Git community is like and making sure that that makes it into GitHub, as well as being able to talk back to the Git core team about what it's like to have 4.5 million repositories on disk, right? And to manage everything that can come up in that kind of variety. So we have an amazing relationship with the Git core team, and that's been really, really helpful. Linus's specific perspective comes from a very, very unique style of managing a very, very, very large open source project. He has a lot of rules. And I think it's actually really, really interesting for us to see what the specific complaints that he has about accepting collaboration from so many people. The biggest problem, obviously, really comes down to identity for them. And so, we've got 2.5 million people that could be contributing to Linux, and I'm thinking he doesn't want that to happen. So the pull requests and actually the commit messages have changed somewhat based on conversations we've had with him specifically. So the one was just really about good commit messages. So you'll see on GitHub now, there's a little bit more UI to sort of enforce good commit message styles with sort of a header followed by a secondary section. The second thing really comes down to identity, which I think is kind of an open question about whether or not that's something that we want to solve the way that he wants to see it. But specifically, the way that Git works on GitHub is the same as the rest of the core team.
Hello. You mentioned that when making decisions, the best suggestion wins, no matter who makes it.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are cases when many suggestions arise and they are different but equally good. And this is the place where in normal companies, usually hierarchy comes into play and someone makes the final call. How does it go in GitHub without relying on hierarchy?
Yeah. So it's a great question because I see it very clearly. And it's so easy to see how a hierarchy can sort of break this logjam, right? We've got some kind of idea. Maybe it's a new feature, maybe it's an improvement to something, and a couple people are discussing about, how can we make this better? And if you look at the conversations that are happening, it's just kind of hot air at that point, right? If you were just going to say, well, I think it should be like this, and I think it should be like this. Code wins arguments. That's how you settle that conversation. And if you feel passionately enough that you are correct and that you want to show everyone that you've got the right idea, write the code. You may learn that you're right. You may learn that you're wrong, but at least you're going to be the one that's going to accept the responsibility for implementing it the way that you want. There's nobody to stop you from winning that argument. So if you're going to lose the argument based on merit, you could also lose that through code. I think it's really, really, really important to know that branches and pull requests don't have to ship. We see tons of code contributions that we delete. It's absolutely essential to have a culture that allows for experimentation and to learn through failure. To know that maybe you thought absolutely in past experience this is the right approach, and you wrote the code and you looked at it and said, I'm not so sure anymore. And it's okay, because now we all know together that what the right decision was, right? So at the end of the day, you'll rarely see a conversation spin out of control until code comes into play, because we don't want to talk about it until there's code. I think pull requests are a great method for that, because you create them with commits. Right? So instead of having big kind of flaming email discussions, it's centered around the code itself. Cool. Thank you very much.
Okay, so this year every speaker is getting a bottle of wine. This is for you.
Yes.
And
drink this right now.
there's one more for Nick. Продължаваме след 15-20 минути, като в другата зала е фри без дикона.